Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from LastCar.info. We're just getting the things set up here for a 4 o'clock live stream here. I apologize for those of you waiting for the 3 o'clock one. We had a few things that had to be handled with my family's move here, and I just got back from that. So I'm a little scrambled here, but we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Let me just see if there is a way to share this. Where is the share link? Where is it? There it is. Let's do that. And I will make sure that we know that everybody knows that we are online, and we'll get started. Almost to the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and do that. And just getting started with today's NASCAR live stream. Come on. Come on in and join the chat. How about that? And boop, let's make sure this works. Let's post it on the Patreon. We're almost to the top of the hour. Plenty of things to cover now that Speedweeks has started. And we're going to jump right into it here. 5. Get that? Oh, that's not there. Post. Leave. Live stream. All right, almost set. Getting up to top of the hour here. And we'll just post it now. Alrighty. Okay. So I think we got the link copied. Let's make sure that this is looking good. Okay. Welcome to the 3 people that are in the chat room right now. I'm just going to make sure that we get everything started. So let me make sure we got the camera in the right spot. Yeah. Let's make sure we get the books in the shot there. Okay. All right. So welcome aboard, everyone. This is Brock Beard from LastCar.info. Let me move the computer out of the shot there a little bit. So Speedweeks has started. We finally made it. It's February, and it's that can only mean one thing. So we had our first last place finisher, which happened in highly unusual circumstances. The first ever rain-shortened running of the Advanced Auto Parts Clash. And what happens? Jimmie Johnson clips Paul Menard on the end of the back straightaway, triggers a massive wreck, and what had been a pretty competitive battle for last place among about 11 of the 20 different starters ends up settling really quickly when both Aric Almirola and Daniel Suarez, who were side by side coming into the wreck, were both collected. Both of them managed to keep going, and Erik Jones, who was about 14th at the time of the accident, ended up secured with the last place finish. What's interesting to note about that, if you've seen the article on the website, the 20 car actually has a long history of having some actual unfortunate luck at Daytona, specifically during Speedweeks. As a matter of fact, the first article we did on a last place finisher was about Joey Logano finishing last in 2009 when they had a massive field for the what was then the Budweiser shootout, and a huge pileup ensued in turns 3 and 4, and he was eliminated from the race. He actually finished last as well in the Daytona 500 the following week. I believe he was the first person to actually sweep both of those events in terms of last place finishes, and then would go on to not actually finish last again in another Cup points race until just last summer when we were at Watkins Glen. Highly unusual for him to finish last nowadays. Shows how much the team has progressed. The 20 team, of course, having the problem with Erik Jones. They ended up getting eliminated as a result of that race, and a lot of controversy has certainly come about from that, and rightfully so. A lot of people were throwing around Ernie Irvan's name in the equation, and for those of you newer fans, Ernie Irvan was a driver that didn't, was highly aggressive and worked his way up the ranks and got a ride with Morgan McClure, the old Kodak film #4 Chevrolet out of the Morgan McClure team. and really turned some heads. He was California native, lives not far from the Sonoma Raceway track out here, and in the early part of his career, actually, is discussed in my JD book. He was actually a driver that by 1991 was really not on good terms with a lot of the different competitors, because people always thought he was the common denominator in causing a lot of big accidents. For those of you who've seen NASCARMAN's video, for example, on the toughest Speedweeks, I'm going to get more into that later, because that was a tremendous experience putting that together, and I hope you've had a chance to check that out. The accident that injured Neil Bonnett in 1990 was actually triggered by Ernie Irvan when he was battling with Ken Schrader up front. I believe, if I remember correctly, Irvan lost a lap and was trying to get the lap back from Schrader at the time of the accident. It might have been vice versa, but I think he was a lap machine at the time. And they got together in turn 4, started a huge pile up, and that's where Bonnett was involved in it. What happened with the reason Ernie Irvan gets brought up in that context is in 1992, after having several accidents, like the Darlington one in 1990, and he had some other accidents in 1991 that didn't put him on good terms with other drivers. Again, the JD book covers that pretty well. He came into Speedweeks in 1992 looking for a fresh start, and what happens? There's a rain delay, very similar to what happened in the Clash last week. There's a rain delay, and then suddenly you have the Jimmie Johnson teammates, Bill Elliott and Sterling Marlin, are dominating the Daytona 500. Rain comes in just short of the halfway point. Everybody kind of calms down a little bit, or so it seemed. Not really a whole lot had happened in the first half of that race up to that point. Then the race restarts. Irvan makes a move off of turn number 2. He gets to the inside of both Marlin and Elliott, and knowing that perhaps these are the two most dominant cars in the field, the front row starters, he's got to get up there and make a move. He made a 3-wide move off of turn 2. It didn't quite work. He didn't quite clear both of the cars and ended up coming across the nose of one of them. All 3 cars smashed together, and then they spun in different directions, and a huge field clearing wreck ended up just taking out all the other competitors behind the field. What's interesting about that is Davey Allison, who has just been inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame, was, I believe, third. He was about 4th or 5th at the time of the accident. Just managed to slip through, as well as Michael Waltrip, who was driving for Bahari Racing at the time. They just slipped through the wreck and ended up settling the race between themselves. It ended up being Davey Allison, Morgan Shepherd, and Michael Waltrip until Waltrip's car faltered at the end. And, that ended up leading to Davey Allison's lone Daytona 500 victory after finishing second behind his father in 1988. But certainly that was really the peak of, people looking at Ernie Irvan and criticizing him for aggressive driving. And, certainly seeing what happened with Jimmie Johnson at the end of the back straightaway at the end of the Clash last week, and again, similar to 1992, knowing that rain is in the area, and perhaps is what Irvan was thinking in 92, that they were heading towards halfway and nobody knew if the race was all going to get in. It could be rain shortened. You end up creating a scenario where people get a little bit more on the edge of their seat. They make a move that maybe they wouldn't have made until later in the race, and somebody zigged and somebody zagged, and it just created a heck of a mess. An unfortunate situation on all fronts, but it's hard to say with the aerodynamics and everything that comes into play into racing these days. But again, a very similar scenario to what we've seen not too long ago, and I guess in that sense, at least from, an armchair quarterback standpoint, it seems like, well, heck, all these years have gone by. You think that people would find a way to make a clean pass on the back straightaway at Daytona without wrecking the entire field. But, sometimes when you throw weather into the equation, I think you just get a scenario where, there's so much money at stake and so much prestige. And, Jimmie Johnson had such a frustrating season last season. That he came into this race, especially as an exhibition, to kind of just, clear the cylinders, if you will, and just kind of get a fresh start and kind of jump right into it and, see what he can do. But, I'm sure he didn't count on wrecking Paul Menard, and maybe Paul just came down a little bit as he came up. And, it doesn't take much to wreck these cars. I mean, I remember Kyle Busch saying that at the night race at Daytona a few years ago when he got sucked around up front, caused a heck of a mess there. And, he rather jokingly said in his interview, "Oh, I just went up there and I wrecked myself." But, it wasn't really that. It was the air, the way that side drafting works. It could work to your benefit trying to draft off somebody, but also it can you cross that line just a little bit further, or maybe the other guy steers left to throw a block at the same time, and then suddenly, as you saw what happened there over the weekend, it just creates a huge problem. So a whole different scenario, and hopefully that's not a harbinger for what's to come Thursday in the duels, as well as looking forward again towards the Daytona 500. But we've seen this in the 500 even more recently. Actually, now that I mentioned this, I'm thinking back to 2009. Dale Jr. was a lap down and trying to get back into contention in that race, again with weather in the area, and trying to get back up through the field. He and Brian Vickers come together on the middle of the backstretch, and that causes a huge wreck, and that pretty much took out Kyle Busch in that one during what probably was one of his best performances in the 500. And much like 1992, Matt Kenseth, who, like Davey Allison before him, was in a backup car, managed to just snake his way through the wreck and be in the right place at the right time when the rain came. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think really we've seen, we've seen this time and time again, and maybe we're going to see this more times in the future. And this was an even more unusual situation because we haven't really seen that so much with the Clash. I know watching some older races, the pole winners race, they've had cloudy weather or weather in the area, but not so much an issue with rain, at least not that I've noticed. I know 1990s, I believe, was running pretty heavy cloud cover, but I mean, back then, of course, you had the race was just 20, 25 laps, and that's just the length of the first stage of it now. So, and I know there's been a lot of debate about that since then as well, and it would be interesting to see. And I think that's really where we go from here. I mean, does the Clash still need to be 75 laps? Do you need everybody to be single file, just waiting for a move at the end of the race and seeing if somebody can step out of line and maybe make something happen there? Do we need that? I'm not really sure. I mean, if you have the race be a heck of a lot shorter, maybe you can squeeze it into one of the other days during the event or during Speedweeks. It already seems like Speedweeks has kind of gone on this progression of having less events through the week. I'm not a crazy fan. I'm not a fan that much of them getting rid of the Wednesday practice. I always thought that was a really interesting session because then you'd have after qualifying on the weekend, but before the duels, you get a chance to get everybody to get like a shakedown run and get their cars set up. And sometimes that would be the event where you really had to be cautious of certain accidents and things like that playing out there. That was actually, I think, really added an interesting element to the race week and to see, to see what would happen. And it's kind of unfortunate to see that go by the wayside because now you have situations where those Hendrick guys, for example, and of course, an amazing accomplishment by, Hendrick to get all four of their cars in the top four qualifying spots. William Byron with his first career pole position, congratulations to them. But they're very much in a difficult situation because now they have to go into the duels and either start adjusting their car for race setup in the duels because they don't have that Wednesday practice session anymore, or just try to stay out of everybody's way and hope you don't mess that car up because it's plenty fast enough. And those tolerances are so narrow these days that you need any little bit of an advantage you can get to kind of get yourself up there. And that's a terrible position to be in. And we've seen pole sitters in the past classified last in the duels because they just parked their car early. I believe Jimmie Johnson, before he ever had, again, another long streak without having last place finishes in his career. We mentioned Joey Logano earlier. Jimmie Johnson won the pole in 2002 as a rookie and just pulled out of the race in the early laps and just said, okay, well, look, we're not going to mess this car up. And then, ended up having a decent run in the 500, although I recall he got spun in that event as well. So, it's always a difficult balance to figure out, okay, I mean, you have a car that's really good for the pole, but then what's a good car for the race? I mean, how many pole sitters have we seen win the 500 in recent years? I mean, we have Hendrick and Chevrolet dominating all of these events, but who have we seen winning this time? We've seen Austin Dillon win. We've seen, they're a Chevrolet team, of course, but we've seen Kurt Busch win. We saw Ryan Blaney last year just dominate most of the race. Didn't win the race, but had a heck of a better showing than Alex Bowman did when he won the pole for Hendrick Motorsports. So it's unfortunate because this is kind of going back to the way the sport was actually not too long ago. And I think we mentioned this in a previous episode of this where, John Wood, when he was driving for the Wood brothers in 2008, you actually had a greater number of teams in the go or go homers or, the equivalent of what are today the open teams trying to compete for different spots. They would run a qualifying setup and then the cars would be impounded, and they couldn't make the adjustments at the start of the race. And so, they would have to make the adjustments. They couldn't make the adjustments before the start of the race. So they had to use the start of the race as that's their last minute practice session they had to get the car set up. So of course, by the time you do that, you pull into the garage area, you've lost like 5-6 laps. I mean, we've seen BK Racing did that at Talladega not too long ago during the end of their time as well. So it's the value of having a good qualifying setup versus having a good race setup. It's kind of academic. How helpful is that really going to be? I mean, you'll have a good run, but the race is so long and so many different things can happen, and then your car gets beat up anyway. I say, just go out there in the duels and see what you can do, and then if you get in an accident, well, hey, just take off what you can put on it, and get the backup car ready as best you can. Again, mentioning Davey Allison and Matt Kenseth, drivers that won the Daytona 500 in backup cars. That wasn't the best car that they had ready for it, but they went out there in the other one and they got it done. Now, both of them maybe aren't the best example because both of them needed large wrecks to take out other competitors, but that could happen just as easily to a dominant car as it could to somebody further back in the field. We've seen that over and over again. So this is the interesting thing with that's coming into this year, and I think it's folly to assume that this is anything unusual from previous seasons. It's perhaps just unusual to see it from Jimmie Johnson, perhaps, but again, he of being in that position back in 2002 of saving his car, but of course, the clash, you don't run your 500 car. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting, and in the duels, I'm glad that we have at least 42 cars, so the duels have some consequence as to the back of the field between Ryan Truex, Parker Kligerman, and the other teams that are trying to compete for those final couple of spots. And it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. What was it? Brendan Gaughan and there's the other one. I'm trying to remember. It's not Cody Ware. Cody Ware has a charter. I knew I was going to forget this on the time there, but. And then the fourth team is on there. But it's a shame, though, at the same time that we had those two teams that didn't show up. We had the 44 car entry list at least speculated before last week, and seeing the NY Racing team that looked like it was going to be loaded up and getting started here. I saw the picture. They had a Mustang nose put on their car, and making that advancement there. I'm not sure if they had any kind of probably not a technical alliance, but at least, I was interested in that manufacturer swap because when Jonathan Cohen had been traditionally entering cars, he usually entered Chevrolets when he had J.J. Ailey driving the 44 car, and then most recently the 7 when he had it fielded out of Premium Motorsports, and then when Premium took over that ride. And then late last year, he ran Toyotas after the dissolution of BK Racing. So they've swapped manufacturers all over the place, and maybe that was a reason that they ultimately didn't show up. I don't know anything myself. I haven't heard anything. I talked to Jonathan Cohen last year at Phoenix, the team owner for the number 7 team, and he told me, he put his arm around my back, says, "I like what you do, but not when my team's finished last." And he was really cool. It was all in good fun. He had people there with the She Beverage Company and everybody matching shirts and stuff like that. Everybody was all excited for Yaley's run the 23 there, and that was good to see. And it was too bad because I was hoping that they'd have something like that for the 500. I mean, Yaley's, no slouch at being an underdog and trying to get the best that he can out of the equipment. But perhaps there was something going behind the scenes that didn't quite get going. I never really heard back from the team. I tried reaching them by email. The email bounced back to me. I tried contacting them on Twitter. I didn't have access to the messages. And so ultimately, I know just about as much as anybody else that's watching this right now. So, we'll see what happens. I mean, maybe they'll run Atlanta. Maybe that was their plan all along. But I haven't heard anything one way or the other. And on that subject, let's talk about the Obica Racing team, the number 97 team. Tanner Berryhill, your heart just has to break for that kid right now. He was all set, like Yaley, showing up to media day and doing the pictures and doing all the presentations. Then they go over to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. They unveil the 97, and they got this this TV company that's sponsoring the car. I believe it was Wave TV. Kind of reminded me of the Yoke TV sponsorship from years past. And trying to get a name for themselves, trying to get the team out there. And then suddenly they're just not on the list. And then I heard other information about them not even possibly having a hauler to bring the car to the track, which is strange because they had a hauler at Phoenix last year, had the number 97 put on the side of it. I assumed it was something that they acquired from the BK Racing team. It certainly looked like it because back then they and Jonathan Cohen actually both had equipment from the BK team, and they were actually swapping cars. I made mention of this on Twitter and also on the website last year, what was happening, and it even seemed like the driver wasn't entirely clear what was happening. The car that Berry Hill ran at Phoenix was actually the same 23 car that Yaley ran the week before under the 23 team, which was, I believe, I don't know if that was still the NY Racing team or if that was under Front Row Motorsports with that. I mean, the alliances were so tangled up at that point. But it was the 23 car that Yaley ran the week before, even had the 23 numbers underneath the 97. But, they were able to run that. And then a 23 car got unloaded from the back of, I believe it was unloaded from the back of the Jonathan Cohen hauler and had the Steakhouse Elite logos that usually partner with Yaley. And then that was loaded in the back of Abaika's hauler so that they could use it the following week. And I suppose that ultimately became the number 97 car that they ran at Homestead. Now, I guess if anything did happen with the NY Racing team with the number 7, it must have directly affected the 97 because it seemed like they had some kind of symbiotic relationship between the two, at least last fall. I don't know anything about if that's carried over this year, because again, I haven't heard anything more from the Abaika team either. But I certainly hope that whatever's going on with both of them, they can be able to get back into the sport, and maybe we see them in Atlanta or going forward from there. But it's unfortunate that both of them missed out on the 500 because you do see that again in the subject of all these accidents that tangle up the field and bring somebody from further back in the field up to the front. It can make things really interesting and potentially be a really good payday since it's such a rich race to carry over to the rest of the year. Even with the distribution of wealth in the sport being different with the chartered teams versus these open non-chartered teams, getting a good finish in the 500 is still going to be worth something. It may not be worth as much as it used to be, but it's still going to be worth something. So, unfortunate situation on all fronts. I hope that gets worked out. But again, I don't have any new information on this. It's just conjecture at this point. But hopefully something gets worked out, and we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead. I want to also talk about the Speedweeks 94 video. And again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier with Neil Bonnett, and I hope that you guys have had a chance to watch that. If you haven't, check out NASCARMAN History here on YouTube and check out his videos. He does an excellent series of videos. He did one on Tim Richmond. He did one on the tire wars between Hoosier and Goodyear. Did several of these different videos, and has really done a good job on them. And I was just fortunate enough to get the call from him to do the narrations on the video. He wrote the script. I just read the words, did a couple takes on it, tried to get it in there, and he did the rest. So credit really goes to him for his work. Definitely give his videos a watch and check it out. Excuse me. But certainly, this week being the 25th anniversary of Speedweeks 94. Oh, I just dribbled that all over the front of me. Well, that's unsightly. Okay, well, I guess we can cover that up somehow. All right. Heck. Looking at the looking at the history of the sport, there are certainly moments in the history that maybe aren't talked about as much because they're uncomfortable subjects. And certainly what happened during Speedweeks 94, again, much like what happened in Formula One a couple of months later during the San Marino Grand Prix between Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna, very eerie parallels between the two, that you had two competitors, both a veteran, a highly respected veteran that was popular, and a newcomer that was very much unknown in the sport. In both cases, both lost their lives in vicious accidents that just seemed to come out of nowhere, and ultimately claimed the lives of both those drivers. And within the context of perhaps other accidents that happened during that time, the accident, Mark Thompson, who just ran in the Daytona 500 last year, was the subject of one of those accidents in the ARCA Racing Series during that week. And you see that the level of safety that has come out of the sport since then, the advancements that have been made in head and neck restraints and the way these cars are designed and everything is attributed very much to accidents like that, and we hope certainly that things of that nature don't happen again. I mean, you never can eliminate it entirely, but at least eliminate it as best you can, and that's really the legacy of both Neil and Rodney. It was particularly interesting doing the video, recalling both those drivers as well, because while Neil Bonnett is a name that perhaps some more fans understand or know about because of his work as a broadcaster. Again, I described it in the sense of if you only knew Darrell Waltrip from his work in the booth, and then you heard he was going to get back in the car again, it would be like the same kind of experience. At least it was for me back in 1994. He was a more visible figure in the sport. It was nice that both in NASCARMAN's video as well as the articles he did before that he brought more attention to who Rodney Orr was, and I think that that was really interesting to me was learning more about him, because that's the story that kind of gets lost with everything else. Very much a small time figure in the sport, just trying to make a name for himself, trying to get up to the next level. Had been the defending Goodies Dash Series championship. For those of you newer to the sport, the Goodies Dash Series used to be a sport where they would run really, really underpowered cars. I believe they were like 4-cylinder engines, like really, really small machines. And they had this very distinctive like pitch to the engine. And they would actually run these cars at Daytona, but they would also run them at a lot of short tracks. And they ran that series, for a long time. So again, it shares some similarities to ARCA, but then again, a significant drop in the amount of horsepower that the cars had, the size of the cars, and things like that, and certainly in more owner drivers, more lower funded competitors. But Rodney Orr, from a very small town in Robbinsville, North Carolina, town of only about 700 people. Everybody donated to pitch into his racing efforts. He ran the number 9 car back in the Goodies Dash Series, and ultimately claimed the championship. I believe it was a close championship that year as well. He was most popular driver. Before that, he was a motocross competitor. And you don't really hear about that so much. You have people going from 2 wheels to 4. I guess you could talk about Travis Pastrana not too long ago, or some other competitors that are more of the X Games enthusiasts looking to get into the sport. But a very different experience, a very different background with him, and perhaps a story where hope if the accident never happened, perhaps there wouldn't be that much information about him, because there would be about 68, 69 different competitors in that race, and you would have almost as many people that didn't qualify for the Daytona 500 that you could put into a whole other race, and it's hard to really get the stories of all of them. But as you see in the video, he was 7th fastest in testing, running on Hoosier tires, running what had been a former Davey Allison car, and also an interesting tie-in with the pole sitter for the race, Loy Allen. Loy Allen had actually driven, I'm not sure if it was that chassis. I have a picture. I was just looking to look for it actually before doing this video here, that he ran the number 37 last year. And I actually have a diecast here of the car right here. This will be a good indication of it. Let me bring it a little closer to the camera. Let's see. Can you see that all right? Yeah. So they actually, what's interesting about this, you see diecast that was made out of the number 51 for Neil Bonnett, because they were anticipating he was going to do about a 6-race season. And of course, with Rodney Orr being so new to the circuit, diecast for his car never got made. The closest thing would be when Loy Allen was running this car. And actually, if you look even closer, they actually misspelled Loy's name. It actually says Coy Allen on the top of this thing. But this was basically the car. And if you look in NASCARMAN's video, it was pretty much this exact paint scheme. The number font was a little different, and the Naturally Fresh sponsorship was off of the car, but the same, kind of purplish bluish paint scheme with the white on there. This was the paint scheme that was actually produced in anticipation of Loy Allen's first year in the sport, and they did a series on this. I think Kenny Wallace and some others were produced with this one here, but that was ultimately the car that was run, or at least one of the ones from that effort, because again, that would kind of fit with him being able to acquire the number 37 car and then run that in that race, especially as an underfunded driver. It would make sense to just run whatever numbers on there and run that as affordably as possible. But apparently, that was a really good piece. And if it was a former Davey Allison car, we talked about Davey Allison earlier winning the 500 in 1992. That would be a really good car. It had an Ernie Elliott engine in there. Ernie Elliott, famous for doing working on the engines much like Randy Dorton did for Hendrick Motorsports and getting these teams up to speed. A very different time in the sport. So again, it was good to go over that story, and it was interesting to kind of put all that in context. And NASCARMAN did a great job on that. So again, NASCARMAN history. Check out his channel. Check out the video. Leave a comment. Leave a like on there. Help him out. And definitely consider subscribing to his work, as he does a really good job on that. And definitely look out for future work from him. So looking ahead, we're getting ready for the Daytona 500 again, and that's really the overall theme of this. And I'm not going to go too much further, I don't think, in this. My plan originally had been to do a video series, like a weekly video series. Originally, this had just been on the Patreon. I just made those videos public because I'm going to take kind of a different approach to this. I had an idea last week to actually move this to a different day. So this will most likely be the last Wednesday video I'm going to do for now. Perhaps we'll do something different in the future. What I have decided to do is, with the new disqualification format that is in place, there is now at least about a 90-minute period after the conclusion of each Cup Series race, or I would assume it's extended from Xfinity and trucks as well, but I'm focusing more on the Cup Series events as kind of a way to wrap them all up. With there being a 90-minute period that's required for figuring out if a driver is going to be disqualified, that has a direct effect with me, because I'm usually immediately after the race, I'm working on my articles and getting my last place features all set up. So it occurred to me, if I'm already going to do that, it would make sense to at least have something going on in the background as kind of like a disqualification watch. Because if somebody's disqualified, well, then suddenly the topic of my article is going to be a completely different thing. So what I'm thinking is that this show is instead going to be changed from a kind of weekend wrap-up thing from Wednesdays, which is already long enough from the weekend that you're already kind of starting to forget about the events from last weekend. I'm going to decide to do this immediately after each Cup Series race. I'm going to at least start with this here and see how this works. We're going to start this not with the duels on Thursday, but we're going to start it with the Daytona 500 this coming Sunday. So my plan is, as soon as I can possibly do it, immediately after the race or soon after it, I'm going to do what I'm going to call the disqualification show. And what the disqualification show is going to be a way to get, immediate reactions about the sport. I'll have the chat open like we do on here. I'm going to make these publicly available so that everybody can watch and everybody can tune in. And I'll just have this in the background, because I usually don't pay too much attention to the post-race show as is on the TV. I don't know about you guys. I don't really, I don't need to really be told what I saw. But if you want to come in here and then just kind of chat about it, or just vent, or something like that, I think that'll be kind of an interesting angle, and we can kind of use that to fill the time while we're waiting for the disqualification results to come in. Now, what I'll probably be doing is I'm going to set up the camera back on my computer here, and it's going to be a little bit less going on, because what I'll probably be doing is I'm going to be starting to kind of, clickety-clack on this and kind of start getting the articles together. But we can also have the chat open and just kind of make it very informal, and we can kind of talk about the race, or just kind of have it going in the background or something like that. And, and just give that a try. And then what we'll do is it'll just be a disqualification watch. We'll keep social media open. We'll see what's going on, and if a driver is disqualified, of course, well, then you'll hear about it on here, and you'll see me make the adjustments to the article, and then get that posted there, and then that disqualification is going to be the subject of the article. Now, I mean, there's going to probably be some changes to this as we go along, because, of course, what if multiple drivers are disqualified? Well, then the lower ranked driver that is disqualified is going to be the last place finisher. Is it going to change multiple times? Well, we see that during the races. Again, it would just be treated like another time that the last place runner changes during the race. it'd be the same kind of thing, because my plan had been from the beginning, and what had already been done in the past, was that a disqualification counts as a last place finisher in my definition. That it's really who is classified last in the race. So it could be that somebody falls out of the race on the last lap, and it seems like it's open and shut. But then if somebody's disqualified and then classified 40th and then slotted beneath them, well, that's going to be the guy that's going to get the statistic, and that's going to be the one of record. So that's the thought going forward. We're going to stop doing the Wednesday shows here for now, and we're going to do Sunday public shows called the Disqualification Show. First one is going to be after the Daytona 500. My goal is I'd like to do it immediately after the finish, if not soon after. It'll be on this channel here, the NADU 1064 channel, and when you're watching the race live, you'll know when the finish is. But the plan is to have it, if not immediately after, within, I would say, at least within a half hour after the finish. It depends on how things go from one week to the next. I'm going to actually be in a different location for the 500, but I believe I can get something set up for there and get that all going. So that's the plan looking ahead. If you have ideas for the Disqualification Show and things that we can kind of bring into it, that'll be cool. Hopefully it's not just going to be me sitting here and me looking at the camera and typing on things, although that's probably going to be some part of it. But we'll still have the chat going, and I can keep that open in a window and do something with that, and we can all just kind of hunker down and wait and see if the last place finisher is going to change again, and that would be kind of an interesting thing. So let me know your thoughts on that in the comments of this video, or things on the website or on Twitter. And I think I'm pretty much going to go ahead and just let it go there. So my shirt already dried off here, so that's good. Well, no, it's a little bit there. I think we're going to go ahead and just leave it there. But again, stay tuned for the first Disqualification Show after the Daytona 500 this Sunday. Stay tuned for the duels this Thursday, and of course the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, the Cup Series through the weekend. Truck Series Friday night, Xfinity Series on Saturday, and the Cup Series on Sunday. My weekend preview article is going to be up tomorrow. I'm just finishing up on that. That's going to be up with the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series entry list as the main focus, as well as some notes on new sponsorships for some of the Cup Series teams and other notes coming up. That'll be updated through the weekend as we have done that in the past. And that'll be that'll be really the focus going forward. So thank you for tuning in. I'll see you guys again on Sunday, and we'll go from there. Okay.